Okay, so I thought I should start with lesson planning, and I would like to share one of the lesson plans that I used very recently, actually 2 days ago, with my high intermediate course at CCBEU Goiânia, okay? So we were talking about expressing opinions and verb patterns using infinitive and gerund. So the first step I took was to set up the classroom. I got to the classroom probably 10-15 minutes before the class started because I wanted to arrange the seats and also put the materials on the desks, okay? So this is the key aspect for a successful classroom organization or arrangement. First you arrange the seats and then you lay out the materials where you want your students to have easy access to them. We were going to work in groups of 4, so I put 4 desks close to each other, and I put some colored sheets of paper with post-its that they were going to use throughout the class. Okay, so the second step was the warm-up. As the students were entering the classroom, I had this word written on the whiteboard. As you can see, I spelled tolerance backwards. Of course, the students were wondering, what did the word mean, right? And they kept asking me, but I didn't tell them the meaning of the word. So we played a little. I asked them to try to guess the word, and finally one of the students said, tolerance, teacher. So if you spell upside down, you can see that tolerance spells this way. And then I asked the students to come to the board and use the letters of tolerance to come up with words connected with this topic. We wanted to talk about tolerance because November 16th was the International Day for Tolerance. Some of the answers the students came up with were respect, religious, arrogance, and some others. And then the idea of doing that was to keep your students curious, as Ken Wilson, a wonderful teacher and inspiration to me, talks about in his books and his webinars. Keep your students curious and then you keep them motivated. This was the lead-in or the first step into the debate that we were going to have a little after. Next step was to choose the groups, right? Even though I asked the students to sit according to the desks they found in the classroom, I wanted to separate them into different groups so that they could work with somebody else, okay? And I used a very creative way to do so that the students would be engaged and they would be more willing to change groups. So what I did, I assigned a mascot to each group. So when they entered on the board, I wrote 4 initials that I would assign to each student in each group so that they could group together in a different setting. The initials were LL, CC, GA, and TR. And each initial corresponded to one of the mascots we used in the class. So here you can see we have the CC, the cute cat, and the whole group is here. So we have our friend Cute Cat, our friend Llama, our friend Garfield, and our friend Trunk. Actually, this has been our mascot for over 6 months now, and he's been traveling the world with me and with some of my students. That's how we separated the groups. So step number 4 was setting up the mood of the class. Remember we were talking about tolerance? I thought the best way to engage students in the discussion was to select very controversial topics they could talk about. So I want you to take a moment as a teacher and think if you would be willing to use the same topics in your class, okay? Remember that those students are teenagers. They are actually at an age that they have to think about vestibular, so they are applying for courses at the university, and I believe they should be able to discuss those topics. The topics are abortion, affirmative action, legalizing marijuana, and gay marriage, okay? So what did I do? I wrote those topics on a piece of paper, I assigned each paper to one of the groups, and then we attached the papers on the wall and we created debate stations. So each group under the stations was supposed to discuss only that topic. But to set the mood, I asked them to write on the post-its their opinions about all the topics first. So they had to say for or against and write in a very brief way why they were for or against those topics, okay? And then they would go around the class and attach the post-its under the topics that I mentioned. Okay, so the next step was to ensure anonymity. I wanted the students to use the post-its at first because I didn't want them to compromise by giving their opinion. This way, I felt like the students felt more comfortable sharing their opinion in a written form, and then they would be more engaged in discussing it orally, okay? The idea here is to make them share without compromising at first. As I told you before, they had to write either for or against and give a very short explanation why they chose those positions. Okay, so step number 6 was finally to start the debate. But remember, we were targeting a very specific language that we wanted the students to use, right? They were supposed to express their opinions using different verb patterns. So this is the list of verbs that they had in their book. They were supposed to debate using those verbs. I thought it would be easier just to give them which verb pattern follows after those verbs so that they can practice with the correct target language. I wanted the students to also change stations as they had finished debating that particular topic. That way the students could talk about everything with different people. So the final step was to unplug the lesson. This is a term used by Scott Thornbury and Luke Maddings in their book, Teaching Unplugged. However, I must confess that this is not really unplugged, it's partially unplugged, because that means that the content comes from the student and they are going to engage in conversation, and whatever pops up in the classroom, we can use and adapt our lesson plan. Okay, so the students were given the chance to propose another topic, controversial of course, that we could discuss in this lesson. We didn't have a lot of time to discuss their last topic, but I felt like I gave them some autonomy to actually make their students engage in whatever they thought was interesting to discuss. The students felt really comfortable in this class. I thought that one student who had a different opinion didn't feel, let's say, intimidated by the others, and felt free to share the opinion. So guys, finally we've reached the end of this presentation. I want to ask you a couple of questions, and your feedback would be very precious to me. So if you can send me anything on Facebook or Twitter or even via email, I'd really appreciate that. So the questions are: do you think this was an effective lesson plan? Do you believe the students were engaged in the lesson? Do you think you as a teacher would feel comfortable talking about those topics? Again, I want to really emphasize this question because a lot of teachers believe we should not touch things like that. And also, do you believe that giving students the opportunity to offer another topic at the end was relevant to them, that they felt that they were collaborating in the classroom setting? So if you can watch the video, send me feedback or anything else, even tips. If you want to correct anything I did, I'd be very thankful. Thank you, and I'll try to produce another video in the following weeks.